In our headlines on this Tuesday, April 21st, here in South Korea, the Trump administration and Iran are trading conflicting comments over prospects of a second round of direct peace talks in Pakistan, even as we count down to the two-week ceasefire that Donald Trump claims now ends on Wednesday evening, Washington time. Meanwhile, following their summit in New Delhi on Monday local time, President Lee and Prime Minister Modi meet with business leaders later in the day as they seek to expand bilateral efforts beyond the traditional sectors of cars and electronics to ships and steel. On the South Korean stock market, the benchmark KOSPI index soars to a new high on this Tuesday, breaking past the 6,380 mark as investors chose optimism with regard to prospects of peace in the Middle East. Prospects of a second round of direct peace talks between the US and Iran in Pakistan remain uncertain amid conflicting remarks from the parties involved. That being said, our Moon Haryan begins with the latest out of the US.
With the two-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran set to expire Wednesday evening, diplomatic hopes are pinned on a second round of peace talks in Islamabad, Pakistan, seen by many as the final opportunity to prevent a return to a full-scale war. Throughout Monday, however, US President Donald Trump delivered a series of conflicting updates on the talks. In an interview with the New York Post, he claimed Vice President J.D. Vance was already on his way to Pakistan, but US officials later clarified that Vance remained in Washington and is expected to depart Tuesday. Speaking to Bloomberg News, Trump also hardened his stance, saying the chances of extending the ceasefire beyond Wednesday evening are very small. While expressing optimism on social media that a deal could come quickly, he warned that lots of bombs would follow if no agreement is reached. At the center of the standoff is the Strait of Hormuz. Tensions peaked Sunday when the US Navy seized the Tusker, an Iranian cargo ship attempting to evade the blockade. By Monday, the US military confirmed it had turned back 27 vessels bound for Iranian ports. The disruption has pushed Brent crude towards $100 a barrel, a concern Trump brushed aside, insisting prices would come roaring down if Iran complies. As the deadline approaches, Washington says its blockade will remain in place until a deal is reached, while Iran has warned it could retaliate over the ship seizure. With more than 3,000 reported casualties in Iran and fighting still active in Lebanon, the Islamabad talks remain a narrow and rapidly closing window for peace. Moon Haryan, Arirang News.
And up next, we share with you Iran's stance with regard to prospects of peace talks with the US in Pakistan. Here's our Ising Jae.
Iran is weighing whether to take part in a new round of peace talks with the United States and Pakistan as diplomatic efforts intensify to resolve the ongoing conflict and ease tensions in global energy markets. A senior Iranian official told Reuters on Monday that discussions are being considered following steps by Islamabad to help end a U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, a key obstacle to renewed negotiations. However, Tehran has yet to make a final decision. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said continued U.S. ceasefire violations remain a major barrier to moving forward with diplomacy. In a phone call with his Pakistani counterpart on Monday, Araghchi emphasized that Iran is still reviewing its options and has not determined its next steps. The uncertainty comes as a fragile two-week ceasefire in a conflict that has killed thousands and disrupted the global economy is set to expire later this week. At the same time, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to travel to Islamabad on Tuesday, according to U.S. officials, signaling Washington's intent to keep negotiations on track. While Iran has not publicly committed to attending the talks, two senior Iranian officials indicated that Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf would participate if Vance is present, suggesting a possible pathway for renewed engagement. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian underscored the deep mistrust between Tehran and Washington, warning that meaningful dialogue depends on honoring commitments. In a social media post on Monday, he said Iran remains wary of what he described as contradictory signals from U.S. officials, adding that Iranians would not yield to pressure as talks approach. However, the Iranian president earlier this month signaled in an open letter that he is open to swiftly pursuing a diplomatic resolution stressing that the outcome will shape the future for generations to come. 이승재, Arirang News.
And here in South Korea, lawmakers across the aisle are seeking to put aside their political differences to promote policies aimed at protecting the public from the economic fallout of the unrest in the Middle East. My colleague An Sung-jin sat down with the floor leaders of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the National Assembly.
Nearly 2 months into the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, the ripple effects are being felt far beyond the region. In Korea, the prolonged instability has begun to impact the economy and a wide range of industries. I sat down with the ruling and opposition party floor leaders of the Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee to gain deeper insight into how the situation is unfolding and what policy measures are now being considered. One key priority emphasized by both sides is mitigating the economic shock. Alongside stabilizing crude oil supply chains, there has been a strong push to broaden import channels and over the long term accelerate Korea's transition toward renewable energy.
So when we combine those policy measures, in addition to the diversification and the energy safe measures, we can kind of survive this period of difficulties, and then we can shoot it back to the normal economic situation.
Support for the energy sector has also been reinforced through the supplementary budget. Measures are aimed not only at small business owners and the self-employed, but also at industries directly affected by the crisis, including transportation and naphtha-based sectors.
Right, so as a member of the National Assembly Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee, if the situation in the Middle East prolongs, what are some policy support measures that the National Assembly could be providing to the public?
Broader livelihood support is also intended to help stimulate domestic consumption. But in the long term, as an export-focused nation, we are a highly energy-dependent economy, so we eventually have to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and the transformation into an electricity-driven nation. I believe that structuring legislation and policy is absolutely necessary.
On the diplomatic front, lawmakers from both parties underscored the importance of multilateral engagement. The Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee has maintained ongoing communication with Gulf states, including meetings with their ambassadors, while also continuing dialogue with both Iran and Israel.
Our greatest strength is maintaining good relations and leveraging these strengths to ensure that our diplomatic capabilities secure the safety of our expatriates, trade, and most importantly, national interests.
But they also stressed that the cornerstone of Korea's response remains its alliance with the United States.
So even though under President Trump, we must try to strengthen our alliance with the United States, at the same time, we must try to have more flexibility or more strategic flexibility in preparation for a new world.
Despite the evolving and uncertain nature of the Middle East crisis, the National Assembly says it will continue to closely monitor its impact on livelihoods and prepare responsive measures in step with changing conditions. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
On the diplomatic front, President Lee Jae-myung and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have highlighted the importance of partnership in navigating the current turbulent geopolitical landscape to ensure mutual growth and stability. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min files this report from New Delhi.
The South Korean first couple were given a grand welcome by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Draupadi Murmu. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung and his Indian counterpart Modi stressed the importance of bilateral cooperation during these turbulent times.
불확실성의 시대 속에서 대한민국과 인도가 상호 성장과 혁신을 촉진하는 최적의 전방위적 협력 파트너가 될 수 있다는 데 서로 공감하였습니다.
Our two countries share common visions in the Indo-Pacific region. Your visit, Mr. President, has elevated our trusted bilateral partnership to one that looks toward the future.
The leaders also exchanged views on regional and global peace amid the current conflict in the Middle East.
우리는 최근 중동 정세에 대한 의견을 교환하며 중동 지역의 안정과 평화 회복이 세계 안보와 경제에 매우 중요하다는 데 공감하였습니다.
Amid heightened international tensions, South Korea and India are sending a concerted message of peace and stability.
Monday's summit yielded key deliverables such as strengthening cooperation on a stable supply of energy resources and naphtha. The leaders agreed to create the Korea-India Industrial Cooperation Committee for cooperation on strategic sectors such as critical minerals and nuclear energy. Also, the two countries plan to upgrade their bilateral economic agreement called CEPA and double their annual trade volume to $50 billion by 2030. Both plan to work together on a host of other areas.
디지털 브릿지 프레임워크를 통해 인공지능 인재 강국인 인도와 세계적 수준의 인공지능 인프라를 갖춘 대한민국 간의 인공지능 디지털 협력 기반을 구축해 나갈 것입니다.
From encouraging exchanges between young talents to cooperation in shipbuilding, environment, and energy, we will expand opportunities to cooperate in a range of fields.
A Mumbai Korea Center will be established to foster cultural exchanges.
The talks came at a critical time as South Korea tries to expand its diplomatic horizon to the global south. President Lee's next stop is Vietnam, where he will be sitting down with the nation's top leader. Yoo Jung-min, Arirang News, New Delhi.
And following their summit on Monday local time, President Lee and Prime Minister Modi also met with business leaders as they sought to expand bilateral efforts beyond the traditional sectors of cars and electronics to ships and steel. Our top office correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
President Lee Jae-myung, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Samsung Electronics Chairman Lee Jae-yong all in one frame. The selfie taken with the Galaxy Z Flip 7 made at Samsung's Noida factory in India has drawn attention as a snapshot of the growing economic partnership between South Korea and India. A business delegation of around 200 people accompanied President Lee's state visit to India. The strong focus on business even reshaped diplomatic protocol.
The original plan was to hold the Korea-India Business Dialogue ahead of the Korea-India Business Forum. But Prime Minister Modi proposed that business leaders join his lunch with President Lee, and we accepted.
According to the policy chief, talks focused on broadening cooperation beyond traditional sectors such as automobiles and electronics into other industries like shipbuilding and steel. President Lee reinforced that message later in the day at the Korea-India Business Forum.
세계적 수준인 인도의 인공지능 소프트웨어 역량과 한국의 반도체, 배터리, 자동차 조선 등 제조 경쟁력이 결합되면 양국은 막대한 시너지를 낼 수 있을 것입니다.
Calling for a step up in economic cooperation between Seoul and New Delhi, Lee reiterated the goal of doubling bilateral trade to $50 billion a year by 2030. Annual trade between the two countries has hovered around $25 billion in recent years, a level the president said falls short given India's emergence as one of the world's largest economies. To that end, the two countries plan to resume the 12th round of negotiations next month to upgrade their comprehensive economic partnership agreement, aiming to reach a deal by the first half of 2027.
Addressing several non-tariff barriers, making it easier to do business between the two countries, easing the rules of origin, expanding market access, and opening up the doors in both countries.
A total of 20 memorandums of understanding were signed between businesses from the two countries at Monday's forum. One of the key deals involves HD Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering developing a new shipyard in India. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea is also poised to expand screen productions with India. Culture Minister Jeju Island met with heavyweights in India's film industry in New Delhi on Tuesday local time on the sidelines of President Lee Jae-myung's state visit. The meeting included a signing ceremony for a joint film project tentatively titled Amour, which is scheduled to start shooting in September. This latest screen venture builds on the success of a recent Korea-India production titled Made in Korea, which topped Netflix's global non-English charts last month. The benchmark KOSPI index soared to a new high on this Tuesday, breaking past the 6,380 mark as investors chose optimism with regard to prospects of peace in the Middle East. Cha Yun-kyung covers the latest rally.
The South Korean stock market shows strong momentum on Tuesday as investor optimism over potential diplomatic breakthroughs outweighed geopolitical risks in the Middle East. Despite the lingering tension between the U.S. and Iran over the Strait of Hormuz, the market appears to be betting on the success of upcoming negotiations. Earlier this month, South Korea's benchmark KOSPI plunged sharply following the outbreak of conflict between the United States and Iran on April 13th, triggering concerns over escalating geopolitical risks. As of April 21st, the index opened 1.34% higher from the previous session and surpassed 6,355 within about 10 minutes. That took the index above its previous intraday high of 6,347.41, set on February 27th before the start of the U.S.-Iran war. Furthermore, KOSPI hit a new historic high on the same day, breaking above the 6,380 mark, reaching its peak at 6,388.47, gaining 169.38 points or 2.72%. Large caps led the gains with Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix up around 2% and 4% respectively when the new record was set. Samsung Electronics reclaimed the psychological 220,000 won milestone, roughly $150, for the first time since late February. Large-cap semiconductor stocks show strength on expectations of strong earnings from SK Hynix, driving the index higher. In the meantime, the Korean won rose against the U.S. dollar. In the Seoul foreign exchange market, the $1 exchange rate began trading at 1,472.41 and closed at 1,468.5, lost 8.71. Still, experts caution that market volatility could persist, depending on how geopolitical developments unfold. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the Bank of Korea has a new governor. Shin Hyun-song took office on this Tuesday amid a host of challenges that he believes call for a flexible monetary policy. Our economics correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Korea's newly appointed Bank of Korea Governor Shin Hyun-song took office on Tuesday, inheriting a domestic economy challenged by a struggling currency, persistent inflation, and geopolitical headwinds.
While it is an immense honor to have the opportunity to dedicate myself to the Bank of Korea and our economy, after working in overseas academia and international organizations for a long time, considering the duties entrusted to me, I feel a heavy sense of responsibility.
Acknowledging his heavy responsibility, Shin outlined his core objectives for his four-year term. He stressed the need for flexible monetary policy and the need to expand financial monitoring into non-bank sectors, using market price indicators as an early warning system against systematic risks. He also emphasized the need for internationalization of the Korean won, confirming plans to establish a 24-hour foreign exchange market and offshore settlement systems. To secure a stable, next-generation payment infrastructure, the central bank will push forward with digital currency initiatives.
Through the second phase of Project Hangang, we will increase the utilization of CBDC and deposit tokens and elevate the status of the won in the digital payment environment through international cooperation, such as the Agora project.
Governor Shin steps into the central bank's top post at a critical juncture. The Korean won remains weak, currently trading in the 1,471 range against the U.S. dollar. The central bank also remains in a complex policy dilemma, having frozen its base interest rate for a seventh consecutive session to balance inflationary pressures from the Middle East conflict against a sluggish domestic economy. Earning his doctoral degree in economics from the University of Oxford, Shin brings an extensive international resume to the role. He previously served as an economics professor at Princeton University and spent 12 years at the Bank for International Settlements. As for his rocky confirmation process clouded by allegations regarding his daughter's passport and criticisms of his extensive time abroad, Shin spoke to the press after his inauguration speech and apologized for any concerns caused, asking to ultimately be evaluated by his results. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On the security front, South Korea has reaffirmed its steadfast defense posture despite a partial U.S. restriction on intelligence sharing with regard to North Korea-related matters. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young explains.
Seoul says core monitoring of North Korea remains unchanged, despite the United States partially restricting intelligence sharing. A South Korean military official told Yonhap News Agency on Tuesday that restriction has been in place since early this month, involving some satellite-collected data on North Korean technologies. The official stressed the move does not affect military readiness, with South Korea and the US continuing to share key intelligence on North Korean military activities, including missile launches. The restriction follows remarks by Unification Minister Chung Dong-young in early March, when he referred to Gusong in North Pyongan province as a possible location of a uranium enrichment facility alongside previously known sites. Washington is believed to have protested, saying sensitive intelligence it had shared was disclosed without prior consultation and has reportedly asked Seoul to take steps to prevent a recurrence. Concerns had been raised that the move could weaken South Korea's reliance on US intelligence, particularly as North Korea has stepped up provocations since its 9th Party Congress earlier this year. But the military says the restricted information is not critical and that joint monitoring remains intact. They point to North Korea's missile launch on Sunday when it fired multiple ballistic missiles from the Sinpo area. South Korea and the US had already detected unusual activity in advance and were closely monitoring the area, including the possibility of a submarine-launched ballistic missile or SLBM. Officials add that multiple examples of North Korean submarine movements have recently been identified near Sinpo, raising the assessment that an SLBM launch could be imminent. Meanwhile, the Unification Minister has defended his remarks, saying they were part of a policy explanation and reiterating that the Gusong facility is based on open-source information. He expressed concern over speculation of a crisis in Korea-US relations and said he hopes the issue will be resolved through communication between the allies. President Lee Jae-myung has also rejected claims of a leak, saying the reference to a Gusong facility was already publicly known through academic papers and media reports, calling the allegations unfounded. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
We're dealing with the worst yellow dust of the season this spring. Dust from the Gobi deserts and Inner Mongolia is really hurting air quality right now. This dust is likely to stick around through tomorrow, so you want to take some precautions. Make sure to wear a mask and try to avoid going outside as much as possible. Because of the lingering dust, air quality will remain poor across the country. Fine dust levels could briefly spike to very bad in Busan, Ulsan, and Gyeongsang-namdo province tomorrow morning. Some 20 to 60 millimeters of rain is expected to fall on Jeju Island, while Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsang-namdo provinces will also see some showers. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 10 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at 8 degrees, Busan at 12 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 19 degrees, Gwangju at 18 degrees, Daegu at 20 degrees. Looking ahead, rain will start tomorrow morning and in some places could linger into Thursday. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. So do stay with us. And as always, thank you for now.